So thank you very much, Bara, for your introduction. So my talk is going to be on visual analytics for P4 medicine. And I guess we might have some unknown terms already in the title. So let me just take one small step back and travel you back to Jan's and Nuska's talk on Monday, where they discussed different kinds of biomedical data. And here you can see an MRI cross-section of the human brain at a very high resolution. And over here, you can see an evolution of acquired MR images throughout the last few years. So these images are actually ordered by increasing magnetic field. And on the left-hand side, you can see an image at 1.5 Tesla. It's an older image. And on the right-hand side, you can see already 9.4 Tesla. But as you heard already in numerous talks, until now, high-resolution medical images are not the only ones that are currently being used in medical research. So we are actually nowadays looking at a very wide spectrum of data, imaging and non-imaging data. We have a tremendous, let's say, galaxy of medical data spanning from many different kinds of sources like genome, cellular data, from simulations, from models of physiological processes, from trackers, anything that you can imagine. And all of these data actually sum up in order to create a vast volume of medical information. So what is that has actually generated all this humongous amount of data? Of course, technologies in acquisition and also in processing and analysis have advanced tremendously the last years. And we all know that healthcare and life sciences are among the most funded research areas nowadays, and new applications are coming out. They're popping out like mushrooms, let's say. However, a very big motivation behind the acquisition of all these data is that medicine is nowadays heading more and more towards the research direction of P4 medicine. And when we're talking about P4 medicine, we mean a term that has been coined something like a decade ago, maybe a little bit more. And it indicates novel ways of early detection and prevention of diseases. So P4, you can see in this slide, stands for personalized, predictive, preventive, and participatory. And practically it means, the personalized part means that the diagnosis or treatment is tailored to every individual patient. Then predictive, the risk factors are identified very early, and preventive, they are addressed before manifestation. Finally, participatory has to do with involving actively the patients into all their processes of diagnosis and treatment. So P4 medicine requires the acquisition and analysis of all these data that we talked before, and it's all the data that we can actually get from the patients. So all these data are, let's say, out there, being collected by patients and waiting patiently to be visualized, explored, and analyzed by us. And today I want to talk about one of the most natural ways, let's say, of doing so, visual analytics. And visual analytics is the scientific field that integrates automated analysis techniques on one hand side, for example, machine learning, data mining, statistics, all this kind of stuff, together with interactive visualizations. And the purpose is to actually support understanding and reasoning, decision-making. And the idea is that we always look at very complex and big data sets. So I remind you of Sylvia Mick's talk yesterday. So in the recent years, visual analytics has emerged and has been applied to many biomedical scenarios as well. And among all applications that I could have chosen, I would like to show you today how visual analytics has been applied for supporting the personalization, predictiveness, and preventiveness, and a little bit about patient participation in prostate cancer radiotherapy. So participatory is grayed out a bit because I'm marginally touching upon that in the last slides. But you might wonder why specifically prostate cancer radiotherapy. So actually, I've been working on this domain since 2013 that I started my PhD. And prostate cancer is one of the most common malignancies in male population. It affects 1 out of 6 men, according to the latest World Health Organization report. And it is often treated through radical prostatectomy, chemotherapy, but more importantly, radiotherapy. So radiotherapy is one of the most common treatments used in cancer nowadays. And the main concept of it is that you use external ionizing radiation, so that often the radiation comes from outside. There are also internal ways of doing it, but we're talking only about external radiotherapy now. And this ionizing radiation is targeting the location where the tumor is, so in this case, the prostate over here, in order to stop the biological processes of the tumors. But the prostate is surrounded by other many organs. So somewhere here, the bladder might start. Here we have the rectum, the pelvic organs, everything around. And these healthy adjacent organs should not be affected because radiation that is used in radiotherapy actually is very harmful for the body, and the patient can have severe side effects. So to avoid these side effects and to maximize treatment, radiotherapy follows a strict planning pipeline before the treatment. So this consists of many rigid steps, as you can see over here. They are all very interesting clinically, but they are especially interesting for us from a visual computing point of view, because as you can see, it involves many of its subdomains. So you can see registration, for example, fusion, segmentation, visualization steps, optimization steps. So it's each one of those steps, it's very data heavy. And in general, we could say that radiotherapy is a very visual computing rich process. So practically radiotherapy is inherently a P4 related discipline. And it's particularly interesting for P4 solutions because the main goal of radiotherapy is actually to improve even more with respect to treatment and to avoiding side effects for the patient. So let's take a look in the first part, the personalized aspect, and how we can achieve it through visual analytic solutions. So one big step towards P4 in radiotherapy is, among others, to account for the anatomy of the patient in a more robust way. So the patient does not get the treatment at one go. He has to go there and get a treatment that lasts a couple of weeks, if not months. And in this entire period, the anatomy, as you can see here on the left-hand side, changes dramatically. In some people less than others, obviously. But nowadays, exactly because the radiotherapy planning pipeline that I showed you before is so long and so complex with so many steps, it is very costly, not only in time and money, but also computationally, to start adapting the planning in order to account for every slight anatomical variability. So clinical researchers need to find a way to investigate whether a very detailed adaptation is actually needed. So that every time they make a slight change to the plan. And they want to know practically if I don't make this adaptation, are there going to be side effects for the patients that otherwise I could have avoided? So how do they try to investigate this nowadays? So in clinical practice, they do very large retrospective clinical cohort studies with lots of past treated patients, but they are actually missing appropriate visual solutions, visual computing solutions for this. So often they use things like what you can see here on the slide. So rudimentary anatomical 2-dimensional, but also 3-dimensional views. Or these kind of plots here on the right, which they call dose volume histograms. And obviously the anatomical views on the left-hand side do not scale well if you want to simultaneously explore many patients or many treatment time points. So you cannot explore easily a patient throughout time. And the dose volume histograms are not actually giving a very exact indication of which part of the bladder is affected. So you can say something like, yeah, with 60% of the dose, 7%, let's say, of the bladder volume is affected in ways that it shouldn't have, but I don't know which part of the bladder actually, nothing more. So we got together with domain experts from the DCPT and from San Diego. And I have been working with them for almost something like 8 years now. And we decided actually to start very small. We will investigate just one organ first, the bladder, because it's very big, it causes quite severe problems in radiotherapy. And then we will move on to the entire pelvis, and then we will try to go more predictive, more preventive. So how did we do this? Long story short, we followed an iterative co-design process, which, as you can see here, has not been linear at all. We had to do many reiterations, a lot of rethinking, a lot of reworking. And the first part was the bladder runner. So this was the contribution of the first part of the project. And it allowed clinical researchers to visually explore and analyze the impact of bladder shape variations throughout the entire duration of the treatment. So practically they could follow now how the bladder shape is going to evolve, and it will affect how it will affect the treatment in an individual patient manner, but also in an entire cohort of patients. So here we cared about three main things. First of all, how much does the bladder vary in a cohort of patients? Then how much the dose administration gets messed up, let's say, because of the anatomical variability. And third, is there a chance of toxicity? So toxicity is how they call side effects. So what did we do? We provided clinical researchers with a basis for bladder shape space analysis based on a number of bladder shape descriptors. So each patient bladder at each time point for each person is reduced to a 14-dimensional vector, so 14 numbers. That is actually more manageable for us than the full shape. And afterwards, we use dimensionality reduction and clustering in order to provide, let's say, a more abstracted view on the individual patients and also on the cohort partition. So which groups of patients have similar anatomical variability. So we are trying to find these patients that are similar to each other and how. And then we also have anatomical views that provide a view, let's say, on probabilistic shape variation. So think of something like a box plot, but applied to a bladder. What is the probability that you find a bladder there? And some additional interactive linked views, which provide a view on the effect of the respective dose distribution. So unfortunately, I do not have time to go into details of the visual designs here, but I'm providing the links to the papers, or you can always ask them. And the last thing here was a view on the toxicity, so a possibility of having side effect risks. So this gave us, let's say, a first working framework for individual patient and also cohort exploration, where we could investigate the bladder shape variability throughout patient treatment and also the respective effect on the dose administration. The bladder runner actually for the first time allowed clinical researchers to go beyond their usual exploration and to conduct for the first time a retrospective clinical study on 258 patients that actually showed that bladder shape analysis could be used for finding which patients could get bladder-related side effects. So now we could start talking about adding a predictive focus to the visual analytics approach that we followed, which could also support more than one simple organ. And for the multi-organ case, we developed a new visualization and visual analytics strategy to extend the bladder runner for this incorporation of the many different organs. So this was done in our framework called VAPOR. And in this case, practically, we want to see whether, let's say, there are main modes of variation in the cohort throughout the duration of the treatment, and whether there is a correlation of these main modes of variation to toxicity. And now we are talking not only about the bladder, we are talking about the entire pelvis. So after an initial preprocessing step, we needed to extract a feature vector for the multi-organ analysis. And we need a new kind of feature vector because now we cannot just use these 14 numbers that we had before, because we want to account for different shapes, For more complex shapes, we now have also the rectum and the prostate, and we need to account for this entire multi-organ, multi-time point cohort. So we use here a linearization step and a dimensionality reduction step. Again, not so many details, sorry for that, but you can take a look at this citation here. And in this way, we make the exploration and analysis feasible for this multi-organ, multi-time step, multi-patient exploration. And we end up having here two main visualization modes, let's say. On the left-hand side, we have a cohort view, which is mainly based on an interactive tabular representation, which you can see over here. And here, grouping, sorting, filtering is possible, or all usual things. Supports also the easy and abstracted comparison of groups of patients, for example, and along with data missingness. So we don't have complete data for all the patients. And also we have a more local shape visualization view over here that supports also the shape and positional variability within a typical two-dimensional, three-dimensional anatomical display. And also some additional features that support, let's say, the easy exploration of individual patients, of ways to compare two patients, for example, or ways to compare two groups of patients. And finally, we can also provide additional insights about toxicity by relating anatomical shape variability to radiotherapy dose. And how do we do this? We practically try to visually relate parts where we have high anatomical variability with high dose irradiation. So practically, we try to find out the parts that have a risk of getting toxicity. So at this point, our clinical researchers could actually identify patients that may fail in their treatment since the beginning. How? They actually conducted another clinical study, and they showed that using our vapor, and they showed that few initial measurements of the first days of the treatment could actually help them find patients with higher risks of side effects. So now it was time to go fully predictive and to add also a preventive support to ensure actually that side effects are not going to occur to patients. How did we do this? We did this with BioMedVis. So this is, let's say, very hot stuff just out of the oven. This paper came out a couple of weeks ago in April. And how we work in BioMedVis, let's assume that we have here a cohort, a large cohort of past patients. And for these patients, the organ shape variability throughout the entire treatment can be quantified. We know everything for these patients, complete data from the beginning to the end of the treatment. Then we have a new patient coming in, and for this new guy, we just have a very few initial data points available. So a couple of scans, nothing more. So we try to find which are, let's say, the most similar past patients to this new patient. And we try to predict, based on all the available information, how this new patient is going to evolve in the future. And also we need to have an initial idea of how the treatment for our prediction could go in the future. So what do we do here is we do a cohort analysis. So we use dimensionality reduction and clustering, and we reveal the main modes of organ variability in the entire pelvis through time in the entire cohort. And here, for example, you can see 6 main modes of variation, 6 clusters. And you can see how much actually the anatomy varies in these groups of patients. Then the new patient comes in. And for this patient, let's say we have 3-4 initial measurements, 3-4 scans. And we are matching him to one or more of the existing clusters. So in this case, he's not matching 100% with one cluster, but he's somewhere between this cluster here and this cluster here, clusters 4 and 5. We have some additional views also where we can manually clean up, let's say, our matching if needed. And then we take all this information from the past matched patients, our complete past data, and the few initial data points of the new patient. And we use a PCA-based generative model to predict how actually the patient's organ shapes will evolve in the remainder of the treatment. So this is a retrospective study, which means that we have all the data available and we can quantify also how well our model actually converges. So we did this with a leave one out method. And here you can see two patients. So we have patient 137, which is, let's say, a good patient. He has stable and nice anatomy. And patient 531 is a patient with a very stable anatomy. His anatomy changes a lot. So you can see how our model can be seen with magenta, with the magenta contours. And you can see how it actually converges with time. So from left to right, we have more time points included. And you can see actually that the more data we include, the more our model is converging. So the gray on the background is actually the ground truth that we have. And on the right-hand side, we can see the evolution of a dice coefficient for the same two patients, where adding more time points to the model also helps the convergence of the model. So after 4 time points, we already converge by 95% to the ground truth. So we can actually use this information to predict which treatment might provide also less side effects and better tumor treatment. So for example, proton therapy in this case might be more suitable, although more expensive, because less dose is administered in these parts of the healthy bladder and the rectum. So this brings us to the last P. Where is the participatory? So I said I would just touch upon it. Theoretically, this previous system could be used also for patient information. For example, to explain to the patient why you should get proton in this case, and you should not get photon. But this is not the intended purpose of BioMedVis. So this is actually the participatory direction is a part of our future intentions. But I would say now that I'm not at all convinced that visual analytics could be actually suitable for a patient. And that's why we start investigating other things, like, for example, data physicalization, like you can see here. So these are just some examples of data physicalization that we did recently for anatomical education, nothing to do with radiotherapy. And the reason why I'm showing them here is because the domain of physicalization has recently demonstrated that physical visualization, so objects, physical models of the data, can be effective and sometimes even more than what you see on a screen. And this is because they are very engaging. They have some unique properties that involve all our senses, so we can touch them, we can interact them, unlike on-screen visualizations. And this could also be used in a BioMedVis context, but I would say also AR, VR technologies like what Pere Pau showed before, or for example, storytelling approaches like what Peter showed I don't remember which day, the other day. But this is in general a story for another time. So to conclude with, I have 1.5 minutes. This project indeed has had significant contributions in computer science through visual analytics, but I would dare to say that it has had a very significant clinical impact also. It paves the way for future improvement of patient treatment. And it has been a tremendously long process, a result of a very long collaboration. This work is still ongoing, and so far it has required a very deep understanding from both sides. We need to understand the domain, and the domain experts need to understand what we are actually doing with visual analytics. Most importantly to me, this is a project that has potential to be adopted in practice throughout our industrial collaborations. And I would say that this is a very important and unusual example of visual analytics. It's a very unusual success story in clinical practice. So usually visual analytics approaches are so complex that they are rarely adopted in the clinic. And here I'm very happy to say that throughout a very long work together with our domain experts, we managed to actually do the opposite. So with this, and it's the first time that I'm good in time in my life, I would like to conclude my talk and to thank a lot of people that have made this work possible. First and foremost, Katarina Furmanova and Ludwig Muren, actually. And especially you for listening to my talk today. And I will be more than happy to get any questions.
Thank you a lot, Renata, for your perfect presentation and perfect timing as well. So we are having some questions here. First is from Diego Rojo, and it's if you could give them any pointer to a good survey or like some starting point for the patient participation P4 work. So where to start?
For the participatory part. So for the participatory part, I do not know from the top of my head right now something that summarizes everything. So there isn't something like a survey, but there is a lot that has been done before in topics like AR and VR for patient information, for example, for communicating, also for educating or for helping and understanding into the anatomy. So I would actually say that perhaps the most most right person to ask this question would be Bernard Prime. I know in his group that they are doing a lot of work towards this direction together with Patrick Zalfeld. So I would use as a starting point the latest work of Patrick, most probably. Perfect. He has a survey also, as far as Bernard can comment on that.
Well, and we are lucky that Bernhard is our next speaker. So
yes. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. So another question is from Palko Ulbrich. How much are clinical experts involved in the design process of these tools? Do they also sketch or correct your designs, or are they mostly consultants?
So actually, I have to say that I was when we started all these, when I started in 2013 in Aarhus, together with me, I was in a big European project, and together with me, there was another PhD student, Oscar. Actually, you can see him on the slides here, and we started together. So this meant that we always were paired together, and we were helping each other. So we built a mutual understanding early on. And Oscar was, let's say, my main, not only consultation point, but also like my point of reference for every design. So I would first run checks with him. Let's say, does this make sense? What do you think about that? We would discuss it. We would correct it, like really hands-on. So I mean, he was not coding, but he was really like very involved into this. And then the other domain experts, they would see, let's say, the final outcome, and then they would have, let's say, a more general view and comment more like on whether they could actually do things. So I would say that it is very important to have at least one person, and it helps a lot if it is somebody that is on the same level as you. So it's very difficult to get a professor, for example, super involved. I mean, Ludwig is tremendously involved, and he is like really passionate about everything in visual analytics, and he wants to know more, which is very, very nice. But it's extremely useful to have somebody on your same level that you don't feel shy, and you can discuss more and really on the point of your visual designs as well.
Yeah, thank you. I think these people are like gems for us.
Yeah.
I have another question here from Niels Olofsson. Actually, he has two questions, but guys, we are already a bit over time, and we are starting in 11 minutes with the next talk. So I will still ask this question, Renata, if you don't mind. And but you can have a break if you want. So the first one is any pointers on how to best visualize variable dose coverage in 3D for a moving or changing anatomy?
Yeah. So I participated recently in a state-of-the-art report writing. So I have it also in my slides at the beginning where I'm showing the pipeline. You can find the reference from there. on visual computing ways of dealing with radiotherapy in general, with different steps of the pipeline. And there is, so magnificently, the first works that were done in medical visualization were in radiotherapy, actually. And still, this remains an unsolved problem. We have also some pointers in the survey where and some discussions, let's say, from domain experts about what they think that they are major challenges. And according to one of them, one major challenge is clutter. So they already have these very cluttered views with they have the dose, they have all the contours of the different organs, of the target volumes, everything. And already for them, the view is very chaotic, let's say. They manage to make sense out of it because they are used to it. But once you start, they don't even use 3D, they use slices. Mm-hmm. And I would say that once you start, we should try to make their lives easier. We should try to help them remove all this clutter and give them visual representations that are easier. For them, it's already quite tough. So we should not just also do things for the sake of doing them, like put 3D, put motion, put this, put that, because for them, it's already very difficult, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great, thank you. Maybe really the last one for now. I also have a question regarding the Hilbert curve. Is it a requirement for the feature vector that the sampling is along the connected space filling curve compared to just using linear indices into the 3D image?
Well, we could have done many different other ways for the shape descriptors. In this case, we went for the, we have two, like one is the Hilbert curve and the other one is the scan line. So in one way, we are dealing with intra-patient, and in the other one, we are dealing with interpatient. So in order to be able to make this comparison. So at that point, with the data that we had, we considered that this was like the most adequate choice. We looked into other things also, like spherical harmonics. I don't remember anymore, but we tried a lot of different things. So at that point, it made sense. So I'm actually having a student right now that he's working on investigating different kinds of shape descriptors. So I hope I will be able to come back to this question in a couple of months and reply to you.
Great, thank you very much.